Hey everyone, ready for another deep dive? Today we're going to be tackling something I think we can all relate to. Resentment.
Oh, yeah.
Why does it stick around? And how can we finally break free from it? We've got a really interesting YouTube script as our guide today. And I think what makes this one stand out, it's not just the usual surface level self-help stuff. This one really digs deep.
I'm intrigued. So many times we hear about how bad resentment is for us, but this one actually breaks down the why, which is really cool. You know, there's that saying, resentment is like drinking poison and hoping the other person gets sick.
Yeah, that's a classic.
But it's amazing how much damage we do to ourselves in the process.
It's so true. And it's almost like, have you ever noticed this? Like when you're holding on to a grudge, it's like you're just letting it take over your thoughts.
Oh, yeah.
It can even affect your sleep.
It's all consuming.
It's like we're giving negativity free rent in our minds, you know?
Absolutely. And it goes beyond just our minds. There's research coming out now that shows that chronic resentment is linked to increased stress, anxiety, even physical health issues. It's like a slow burn inside of us that affects everything.
Okay, so we get it. Resentment's bad, but why is it so hard to let go?
Why?
This script, it outlines 10 different factors, and reading through it, I've realized I've been holding on to things way longer than I should.
Oh, interesting.
One that really stuck out to me, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on this too, is this idea of injustice.
Okay.
Like when we feel wronged, we want things to be made right. But when that doesn't happen, it's like that feeling of powerlessness just fuels resentment for years.
It makes sense. It's almost like we're constantly replaying that unfair situation over and over again in our minds.
Yes. And speaking of replaying things, the script also goes into how past wounds can actually become breeding grounds for resentment.
Oh, interesting.
Have you ever noticed how sometimes a small disagreement can trigger a huge reaction? It's almost like there's some unresolved stuff lurking beneath the surface, don't you think?
For sure. Those past hurts can really distort our view of what's happening in the present. Like, for example, if someone was constantly criticized growing up, even years later, a harmless comment from a coworker might feel like a personal attack.
Right.
And then that triggers that intense resentment.
It makes you realize how important it is to address those past wounds.
Yeah.
But then there's forgiveness. Everybody says, oh, just forgive.
Yeah.
But that's easier said than done.
It can feel impossible sometimes. And I think where people get caught up is this idea that forgiving means condoning what happened.
Okay.
But this script actually redefines forgiveness. It says it's an act of self-care.
Oh, interesting.
So it's about releasing yourself from the burden, not letting the other person off the hook.
So it's not about saying what happened was okay. It's about saying, I'm going to move forward without carrying this anger.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Imagine someone's been carrying a heavy backpack for years. Forgiveness is like finally putting that backpack down.
I like that.
The contents are still there.
Yeah.
The experience happened.
Right.
But you're no longer weighed down by it.
Okay, I love that analogy. It really takes the focus off the other person and puts it back on how we can take care of ourselves. Okay, next up on this list of resentment culprits, jealousy. I think we've all been there, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
And social media just fuels that fire. It's a constant highlight reel of everyone's seemingly perfect life, which just makes us compare.
Oh, yeah.
And that breeds resentment.
Totally. It's interesting how quickly jealousy can turn into something way more toxic.
It is.
It's like we start assuming people got ahead by being ruthless or that they're just lucky. We don't give them credit for the work they put in.
Exactly. And we start creating these narratives in our heads that justify our resentment.
Yeah.
We ignore the hard work, the sacrifices, or even, maybe even the luck that contributed to their situation.
It's like we're only seeing what we want to see, and it's just fueling that resentment.
Totally.
You know, since we're talking about those stories we create, the next point the script makes is about selfishness and pride.
Okay.
And this one was like a light bulb moment for me. It's like our own ego can actually be the biggest obstacle to overcoming resentment.
It's true. We get so caught up in being right, protecting our image, that we refuse to see our own role in the situation.
Instead of taking responsibility or even trying to see the other person's perspective, we just double down on that resentment.
It's like we're using it as a shield.
Yeah.
And that defensiveness just traps us in a cycle of anger and bitterness.
It's like we're in a prison of our own making.
Exactly.
And the key to getting out is humility and self-awareness.
Powerful stuff.
It's like that saying, holding on to anger is like grasping a hot coal with the intent of throwing it at someone else. You are the one who gets burned.
That's such a good visual. And it's the perfect segue into the next factor, which is anger management.
Okay.
It's not just about feeling angry. It's about how we deal with that anger. Bottling it up only makes it worse. It festers and turns into that resentment that we've been talking about.
So acknowledging it and finding healthy ways to express it is key.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And there are so many great techniques out there. Journaling can be super helpful for processing your emotions. Exercise is a fantastic way to release pent-up energy.
Yeah.
Even practicing mindfulness can help us observe those angry thoughts without letting them take over.
Those are great tips. You know, it's interesting. The script also brings up how sometimes that resentment, it doesn't even come from us. It can be influenced by other people's negativity.
That's huge. We don't always realize how much our social circles affect us. If we're constantly surrounded by people who complain, gossip, or hold grudges, it's bound to rub off on us.
Yeah, it's like that saying, you are the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with.
Totally.
So if those people are always negative, it's going to affect how you see the world.
It's a subtle but powerful force.
It makes you wonder, are we choosing who we let influence us? Or are we just passively letting them shape our thoughts and feelings?
A great question.
I know I've been in situations where I was absorbing negativity from people without even realizing it. So being mindful of who we surround ourselves with, that's so important.
It really is. It's not just about avoiding negative people. It's about actively seeking out people who lift you up and inspire you. People who model healthy emotional habits, who encourage you to grow, who remind you of all the good in the world.
It's like creating a positive feedback loop, right? The more we surround ourselves with positivity, the more we cultivate it within ourselves.
Exactly. And speaking of cultivating positivity, this script dives into how insecurity and fear can be breeding grounds for resentment.
Okay.
So for someone who's struggling with those feelings, resentment can become this twisted form of self-protection.
Oh, I see. So it's like pushing people away before they have a chance to hurt you. But then you end up isolating yourself and making those feelings of insecurity even worse.
It's a vicious cycle. And it often stems from a lack of self-confidence, which is the next factor on the list.
Makes sense.
When we don't believe in ourselves, it's easy to feel threatened by others' success.
Right, or assume they're out to get you.
Exactly.
So resentment almost becomes like a mask to hide those feelings of inadequacy.
In a way, yeah. It's a defense mechanism that prevents us from confronting our own insecurities and working on building genuine self-worth. And this ties back to the idea of personal growth.
Okay.
The more we invest in ourselves, the less we'll need to use resentment as a crutch.
So it's about recognizing our own value and worth separate from what other people think or how we compare to them.
Exactly. And this leads us to the final factor this script explores. The idea that resentment can actually be a learned behavior. We often underestimate how much our families and cultures shape our emotional patterns. So if you grew up in a family where holding grudges was normal,
right,
you might find yourself repeating those behaviors without even realizing it.
It's like inheriting those unspoken rules.
Exactly. And that's why self-awareness is so important.
Yeah.
By becoming aware of these learned patterns, we can break free and start to relate to the world in healthier ways.
This is something that really hit home for me because I realized some of my own tendencies toward resentment come from how my family handled conflict when I was growing up. It's not just understanding those individual factors, it's seeing how everything fits together, the bigger picture.
I love that. We're not just individuals. Our emotions are shaped by all our relationships and experiences. Understanding that is key to really getting to the bottom of resentment.
Well, I think it's safe to say we've taken a deep dive into the causes of resentment. But the good news is this script doesn't just leave us wallowing in all that negativity. It actually offers some solid advice on how to move past it.
Absolutely. And it really emphasizes that while resentment is common, it's not something we're doomed to experience forever. We have the power to choose how we respond to tough situations and develop healthier patterns.
Well, I'm ready to hear about those strategies and put all this knowledge into practice, but I think we could all use a little break first. We'll be back soon to talk about the empowering solutions in this script. Stay tuned.
All right, so we've talked about why resentment takes root.
Yeah.
But now let's talk about how to actually uproot it. This script doesn't just leave us hanging with the problem. It gives us tools to work with.
You know, when we first started talking about forgiveness, I have to admit I was a little skeptical. It felt kind of like, I don't know, a little too woo-woo for me.
Right.
But the way this script talks about it, it's like it's a gift we give to ourselves.
Exactly.
And that changes everything.
It's such a powerful shift in perspective, isn't it?
Yeah.
We tend to think of forgiveness as letting the other person off the hook.
Yeah.
But it's really about releasing ourselves from that pain they caused.
Yeah. There was this line in the script that really resonated with me. It said, "Forgiving doesn't mean forgetting. It means choosing peace over poison."
It's so good.
It really gets you thinking.
And forgiveness, it's not a one-time thing.
Oh.
It's a process. Sometimes it might involve journaling. Sometimes it might involve having a difficult conversation, even if it's just in our own heads.
Right.
It's about figuring out what brings us closure.
So instead of letting that resentment fester and control us, we're choosing how we want to feel.
We are.
We're taking back that power. And speaking of control, the script also talks about anger management. And that feels a little bit more, actionable, right?
For sure. Yeah. And there's a ton of research that shows it's not just about calming down. It's about rewiring how we react to those things that make us angry in the first place.
Okay. So instead of letting anger turn into full-blown resentment, we need to find healthy ways to express it.
Exactly. Things like exercise, getting out in nature, those aren't just distractions. They actually change what's happening in our bodies.
Right.
Or even think about things like cognitive reframing. Like instead of seeing a situation as a personal attack, is there a way to see it more neutrally?
Yeah, that's a good one. It's like taking the power away from that initial angry thought. Okay, so then the script talks about personal growth. And to be honest, when I saw that on the list, I was like, what?
Yeah.
What does learning a new hobby have to do with letting go of resentment? But now I'm starting to get it.
Yeah.
It's about building up that resilience, right?
It is. The more confident we are, the more self-aware we are, the less likely we are to take things personally. The less likely we are to see an insult when there wasn't one.
So like if someone cuts me off in traffic, instead of automatically going into resentment mode, I can think, well, maybe they're having a bad day.
Yeah.
It's not always about me.
Exactly. And personal growth isn't always these huge life changes. It can be simple things like reading a book about emotional intelligence or trying out a meditation app.
Okay.
Little things that add up over time.
It's like we're giving ourselves an emotional upgrade.
We are.
Okay, this one hit home for me. Negative influences.
Ooh, yeah.
I've definitely had friendships that, looking back, were just not good for me.
It's tough because sometimes it's the people we're closest to that are adding to our resentment without realizing it. They're not trying to hurt us, but if they're constantly complaining or focusing on the negative, it affects us.
It's true. It's like that saying, misery loves company.
Right.
But the good news is we have the power to choose who we spend our time with.
We do. Yeah. And it doesn't mean cutting people out of our lives completely, but we do have to be mindful of what we're letting in. Yeah. Can we steer the conversation in a more positive direction? Can we choose to be around people who uplift us?
So it's like we're being intentional about what we let into our lives.
Right.
We're curating our social circle to create a healthier environment for ourselves.
I love that.
Okay, so we've covered forgiveness, anger management, personal growth, and being careful about who we let influence us. That's a lot. How do we actually use all this?
Well, I think the first step is just being aware. Can we notice when those resentful thoughts start popping up? What triggers them? How do they feel in our bodies?
Okay.
It's like being a detective for our own emotions.
Yeah.
And once we understand those patterns, we can use these tools to break free. Maybe forgiveness is the right approach for one situation. Maybe reframing our thoughts is better for another. It's not a one-size-fits-all kind of thing.
So we're building up our emotional toolbox, and we need to know which tool is right for the job.
Exactly. And the more we practice, the easier it gets. It's like building a muscle. It's tough at first, but it becomes second nature over time.
And think about how freeing it would be to not be controlled by resentment.
Oh, yeah.
We can focus on the present, have better relationships, and just live a happier life.
That's the beauty of this script. It's not just about fixing a problem. It's about opening up a whole new way of living.
Okay, so we've talked about the causes of resentment, and we've gone over some really powerful ways to get past it. But there's one last piece of the puzzle.
There is. And this might be the most profound takeaway of this whole deep dive. This script reminds us that, at the end of the day, resentment is a choice.
Wow. Okay, now I need to know more. We'll be right back to finish up our exploration of resentment. You do not want to miss this. All right, so we're back. And I'm ready to dig into that last point about resentment being a choice. That really got me thinking.
Yeah, it's a big one. I think we tend to feel like resentment just kind of happens to us. Like we don't have a say in it. But this script, it turns that whole idea on its head.
So instead of saying, ugh, I'm so resentful because of what they did, we're saying, I'm choosing to hold on to this.
Exactly. And it might be an unconscious choice, but it's still a choice. And recognizing that is huge, because if holding on is a choice, letting go is too.
Okay, I can see how that's empowering, but it's also kind of a lot to take in. It means we're responsible for how we feel, even when it feels like someone else messed up.
It doesn't mean we have to pretend our feelings aren't valid, but it does mean we can choose how we respond to them. We can stay trapped in that cycle of blame and anger, or we can choose something different.
It's like we're at a crossroads. One path leads to bitterness and being alone, the other leads to healing and growth.
And that path to healing, it's going to look different for everyone. Some people might find forgiveness is what works for them. Others might focus on personal growth or surrounding themselves with positive people. It's about finding what clicks for you.
So there's no magic formula. It's more like we've got this toolbox now, and we have to learn which tool to use for different situations.
Exactly. And that's actually kind of exciting. It means we can create a life that's not weighed down by resentment.
I love that. Instead of letting resentment run the show, we get to decide how we want to deal with it.
And that is true emotional freedom.
Wow. This deep dive has been incredible. We started out feeling like resentment was this mysterious, overwhelming thing, but now we understand where it comes from, and we've got all these tools to work with.
And I hope everyone listening feels that too. You're not alone in this. Resentment is something we all deal with, but it doesn't have to control us.
So as we wrap things up, I want to leave you with this question. What choice will you make today? Will you keep holding on to that resentment, or will you choose the path towards healing? You have the power to choose, and we believe in you. Thanks for joining us for this exploration of resentment. We hope you learned something valuable and that you feel empowered to break free. Create a life full of peace, joy, and real connection. Until next time, keep diving deep and keep choosing freedom.